27 years. That's how long Concorde operated as the only successful supersonic passenger aircraft in history, and throughout those 27 years, it flew with a structural vulnerability that engineers had documented, regulators had flagged, and neither manufacturer nor operator had resolved. On July 25, 2000, that vulnerability killed 113 people in under 2 minutes. To the untrained eye, it was a freak accident caused by a stray piece of metal on the runway. But to engineers, it was the catastrophic intersection of aerodynamic physics and a known, unresolved design blind spot. A blind spot born out of desperation to win a multi-billion-dollar race. To truly understand why this flaw was ignored, we have to look back at the treaty that started it all. On November 29, 1962, Britain and France signed an agreement to jointly build a commercial supersonic airliner. 4 companies divided the work: British Aerospace and Rolls-Royce from the United Kingdom, Aerospatiale and Snecma from France. The original program cost estimate was £70 million. By 1976, the actual cost had reached between £1.5 and £2.1 billion. In 2024 values, that range sits between £11.9 and £16.7 billion. The British government's own accounting in 1977 put the total program cost, development, production losses, and operational subsidies combined at over $4 billion. That figure is in 1977 dollars. 18 airlines placed options to purchase Concorde, around 100 options in total. Pan American, TWE, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines, Continental, American, Eastern. By 1975, virtually all of them had withdrawn. Pan American called it too costly. TWA described the economics as dismal. Sir George Edwards, chairman of British Aircraft Corporation, called the mass withdrawal a hell of a setback. The commercial case for Concorde had collapsed before the aircraft ever carried a paying passenger. The aerodynamics explain part of why. To sustain Mach 2.04, more than twice the speed of sound, the fuselage had to be long and narrow. That configuration is a physical requirement at those speeds, not a design preference. It also meant Concorde could carry at most 120 passengers. The Boeing 747, already in commercial service by the time Concorde's orders were evaporating, carried 400. Spreading fixed operating costs across 120 seats while competing against an aircraft carrying 400 made the unit economics unworkable. The consortium needed to sell at least 150 aircraft to recover development costs. They delivered 14 to commercial operators, both of which were government-owned carriers with limited capacity to refuse. Fuel compounded the problem. Concorde was designed during the 1960s, when jet fuel was inexpensive. By the time it entered commercial service in January 1976, the 1973 oil crisis had already doubled fuel prices. Concorde's engines consumed 4 times more fuel than the first-generation jets they were flying alongside. A single transatlantic flight burned 6,771 gallons, spread across 100 passengers. Any significant movement in oil prices fed directly into ticket prices. On April 27, 1973, the Federal Aviation Administration's rule prohibiting civil supersonic flight over land took effect in the United States. Any civil aircraft exceeding Mach 1 over American territory was banned outright. The rule confined Concorde to oceanic routes exclusively. Every land-based premium route, domestic U.S. corridors, transcontinental markets, short-haul city pairs, was permanently foreclosed. The only commercial product Concorde could sell was transatlantic service between a small number of coastal cities. Both airlines eventually contracted to New York as their single regular destination because all other routes operated at a loss. Some analysts argued the ban amounted to protectionism. The United States had cancelled its own competing supersonic program, the Boeing 2707, in 1971, and the overland prohibition followed 2 years later. Professor Douglas Ross characterized restrictions placed on Concorde operations during the Carter administration as an act of protectionism of American aircraft manufacturers. Whatever the motivation, the practical effect was the same. Concorde's addressable commercial market was legally restricted from the first day of service. By the mid-1990s, British Airways was charging $7,574 for a round trip between New York and London, equivalent to over $12,000 in 2020 values. A significant portion of seats on many flights were occupied by employees on discounted fares, loyalty program upgrades, or complimentary tickets. British Airways addressed the revenue problem through an unconventional method. In the early 1980s, internal research showed that public perception of Concorde fares was already higher than actual prices. The airline raised prices to match those perceptions. In its best year, British Airways reported between 30 and 50 million pounds in operating profit from the aircraft. Total program revenue over the commercial lifetime reached £1.75 billion against operating costs of around £1 billion. The governments that funded the program saw none of that return. In 1984, the British government sold its entire Concorde fleet, aircraft, spare parts and tooling, to British Airways for £16.5 million. 2 aircraft were transferred at £1 each. Lord Heseltine, the minister who negotiated the sale, was later asked whether it qualified as one of the worst government deals on record. His response: "That is probably right. The financial losses are one part of the record. The safety record is another, and the two are connected. Because of the way Concorde's delta wing generated lift at low airspeeds, the undercarriage had to be unusually tall and strong to accommodate the aircraft's high angle of attack at rotation, approximately 18 degrees. That geometry placed significant stress on the tires at high speed. Those tires sat directly beneath integral wing fuel tanks. The proximity had been identified as a vulnerability during the certification process, though the full implications were not resolved before the aircraft entered service." The first serious tire failure occurred in June 1979 during a departure from Dulles International Airport. Tires on the left main landing gear blew out. Debris punctured 3 fuel tanks, severed electrical wiring, and damaged multiple hydraulic lines. The crew made an emergency landing with fuel leaking from a dozen points in the wing structure. Following that incident, the National Transportation Safety Board issued warnings. The FAA sent urgent airworthiness directives to both Concorde operators, and modifications were made: roll-on wheel rims, strengthened tires, and a tire failure warning in the cockpit. The incidents continued. Over Concorde's 25 years in service, it experienced 57 tire and wheel failures. Air France recorded 30, British Airways recorded 27. In 32 of those events, damage to the aircraft's structure, hydraulic systems, or engines resulted. Fuel tanks were penetrated on 6 separate occasions. In 1981, NTSB Chairman James B. King wrote formally to his French counterpart, expressing serious concern about the repetitive nature of these incidents. The rate of tire damage on Concorde between 1995 and 2000 was 30 times higher than on subsonic airliners. After the 2000 crash, a senior British Civil Aviation Authority official acknowledged that the accident was almost identical to the June 1979 mishap and 30 other incidents involving serious damage over the years. The difference was the fire. Former NTSB Chief Jim Burnett stated plainly, Concorde could have been certified with a design flaw nobody noticed at the time. The flaw had been noticed. It appeared in the record 57 times. It was not resolved. On the afternoon of July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 was preparing to depart Charles de Gaulle Airport for New York. The aircraft was a 25-year-old Concorde, registration FBTSC. The 100 passengers were primarily German tourists traveling on a package tour that included the Concorde flight to New York, followed by a cruise to Ecuador. 5 minutes before the Concorde began its takeoff roll, a Continental Airlines DC-10 departed the same runway heading for Newark. During its departure, the aircraft shed a titanium alloy wear strip from the thrust reverser cowl door of its number 3 engine. The strip was approximately 435 millimeters long, between 29 and 34 millimeters wide, and 1.4 millimeters thick. It came to rest on runway 26 right. That strip had been replaced during maintenance in Houston, Texas on July 9, 2016 days before the crash. The aircraft manufacturer specified stainless steel for that component. The mechanic used a strip made of 90% titanium. It was neither manufactured nor installed in accordance with the procedures defined by the manufacturer. At 4:42 in the afternoon, Flight 4590 began its takeoff run. Past decision speed, the point beyond which aborting the takeoff safely is no longer possible, the left main landing gear rolled over the debris. The number 2 tire was cut. A section of tire weighing 4.5 kilograms was launched into the underside of the left wing at an estimated speed of 310 miles per hour. It did not directly breach any fuel tank. The impact generated a pressure shock wave through the fuel in the fully loaded number 5 tank, rupturing the tank from within. Fuel began escaping from the wing at an estimated 20 gallons per second. It ignited. 2 engines on the left side began losing thrust. The aircraft could not retract its landing gear. It reached an altitude of 60 meters and could not climb further. 90 seconds after leaving the ground, the remaining left side engines failed. The aircraft stalled, rolled past 100 degrees of bank, and struck the Hotelissimo Les Relais Bleus hotel in the Paris suburb of Gonesse. All 109 people aboard were killed, along with 4 on the ground. A French court found Continental Airlines and the mechanic responsible for the improper repair guilty of involuntary manslaughter in 2010. An appeals court overturned the criminal convictions in 2012. A civil fine remained in force. What the legal proceedings could not alter was the engineering record. After the crash, Michelin developed new burst-resistant tires that substantially reduced the risk of catastrophic blowouts. Tires, the investigation found, could have been developed and deployed at any point in the preceding decades. Post-crash modifications included Kevlar fuel tank liners, improved electrical protection in the undercarriage bay, and the new tire specification. Concorde returned to service on November 7, 2001. The first post-modification passenger flight landed in the United States on September 11, 2001, shortly before the attacks on the World Trade Center. The market Concorde depended on. Premium transatlantic business travelers bound for New York contracted sharply and did not recover. Air France operated its final commercial Concorde service in May 2003. British Airways followed on October 24th. The final Concorde flight anywhere took place November 26, 2003. A British Airways aircraft carrying 100 crew members going supersonic over the Atlantic before landing at Bristol Filton Airport in front of a crowd of more than 20,000 people. In 2003, Richard Branson offered £5 million for the Concorde fleet, with the intention of continuing supersonic operations through Virgin Atlantic. British Airways declined. The airline had concluded, after the grounding period, that passengers who had previously flown Concorde were generating more revenue in first class on standard wide-body aircraft. The program's financial summary, taken in full, reflects a consistent pattern of cost underestimation and market overestimation. The original 1962 estimate of £70 million, worth £1.77 billion in 2024, grew into a final development cost the British government alone valued at over $3.25 billion in 1977. Neither government recovered its investment. The 2 airlines that operated the aircraft did generate operating profits once development debt was written off, but only because the governments absorbed losses that neither commercial logic nor public accountability could fully justify. A British Treasury review conducted before the program was formally approved concluded that a positive financial return was unlikely. That assessment was set aside on the basis that competing nations were pursuing the same technology, and Britain and France did not want to be excluded from what they anticipated would be the future of commercial aviation. No other nation succeeded in operating a supersonic passenger service commercially. The Soviet Tu-144 flew briefly in the late 1970s and was withdrawn. The Boeing 2707 was cancelled before completion. Concorde alone flew for 27 years, crossed the Atlantic tens of thousands of times, and maintained until 2000 what was arguably the lowest passenger fatality rate per mile of any commercial airliner in operation. In June 2025, the United States lifted the 52-year prohibition on commercial supersonic flight over land by executive order. The regulatory constraint that had permanently limited Concorde's commercial viability was removed 22 years after the last Concorde landed. The aircraft now sit in museums. The development costs were never recovered. The 57 tyre incidents are in the record. The modifications that followed the crash are in service on aircraft that no longer fly, and the question that the record leaves open is a factual one, not a rhetorical one. The post-crash engineering review established that the fuel tank and tyre vulnerability was addressable with available technology. The vulnerability had been documented since 1979. The aircraft flew for 21 more years before the fix was applied.